Hello. So this should be live now. I'm going to put a message over here to check. And see me. So hello, Sarah. Hello, Aneta. So I think I can hear myself. Yeah. Hello, Vadim. Yeah. Hello, Aneta. Loud and clear. Thanks. Great. Okay. So today, this is based on. Today's topic is based on a poll that I put in the Facebook group for the 30-day speaking challenge. And earlier in January, let me just pull up this poll. Turn off my volume over here. Okay, yeah, I can hear myself. So I was asking you guys about your priorities for language learning. And what the choices were on there were about vocabulary learning, learning more vocabulary, remembering new words, phrases, finding them when you're speaking. We talked a little bit about that last week. And then the second highest priority that was on here was being able to speak without overthinking or translating or hesitating. So I think those two together with vocabulary and using them actively when speaking, and this idea of overthinking or translating, hesitating, I think they go together, especially within the context of speaking, and not only speaking by yourself, but speaking when you are with a partner, with a teacher, with a friend, or in a group of people, like at a dinner party or a small gathering of friends. So we're going to look at a few tips and things that I've kind of developed over the years, either through learning languages myself and also working with students. So just, hi, Tatiana as well. And how's everybody doing? And just making sure, I can see comments here. I have it on my phone. I have it on the computer. So I think on the computer, the messages are a little bit more up to date. I guess I'm going to have to refresh this on my phone though, just to double check. Just to stay up there. I'm not necessarily going to be using slides here. I just want to be able to get a chance to talk with you more directly. And I think later on, I probably will take some of the things we talk about and add them into slides or add them into a refresher for either the daily email or maybe for an upcoming blog post or also maybe a chapter coming up in the book that I'm writing for the 30-day speaking challenge. Okay, so let's see a little bit some of the languages you're focusing on right now and where you seem to be kind of struggling a little bit on this idea of maybe thinking in your head, translating, speaking directly. I know I received some comments also in the Facebook group, so let me go check that out and comment on that while you say a few more things here on the YouTube chat. So let me see here. Because I also asked for today a little bit about, let me go through some of these questions I was asking. So in terms of thinking and speaking, are you trying to think directly in your target language? Are you thinking in your native language and then speaking, or do you feel that you're able to like go directly in your target language? Because the process of kind of thinking, looking for your words, formulating your grammar, your sentence, your syntax in your native language, depending on your target language, this can be a really different situation. As an English speaker, when I'm trying to think in English and then speak in either German or Russian, I can sometimes get a little tongue-tied in terms of the sentence structure, because I feel a little bit more flexible in Russian now that I'm getting the case endings and realizing that the word order can be flexible. However, when I have to take the same thoughts that I just said in Russian and put them into German, there I feel a little bit more constrained, especially in terms of like where to place a verb. If it's at the end of a clause, or maybe at like if it's the infinitive, where to place that if it's at the end of the phrase. So that adds another layer of kind of a mental puzzle with the speaking. So that can be a little tricky. And I see for my students who speak Slavic languages like Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, Czech, sometimes I can see their mental, their thought process as they're trying to switch between their native language and English, and that can take some practice, which is one of the benefits of the speaking challenge, where you can go through those mental exercises by yourself, and if you need to kind of delete a recording, redo it again, you have that luxury of that extra time. But when it comes time to speaking in front of an audience or another person or a group of people, the speaking process is not quite like writing, when you can look for your words without the pressure or the anxiety. So the level of accuracy that you're looking for when you're writing, when you're by yourself, I think it needs to come down a little bit so that you're not as exigent, looking for the perfect word, the perfect phrasing. When you are surrounded by other people, the priority now becomes communication and not necessarily like perfection or 100% accuracy. So close enough is a good target when talking to other people. So when we can lower that threshold of maybe some mistakes or the vocabulary is not being like the exact word I'm looking for, you need to come up with some other options, tools, or alternatives. So this happens to me frequently when I'm speaking Spanish and French with my wife. I speak English with my kids, so it's usually not such a big deal, but there is the interference of Spanish in my English sometimes when I know a word in Spanish because my kids just said it to me. However, I'm their source of English, so I also need to be able to directly translate what they just told me from Spanish back into English so I can respond to them. But sometimes there will be common daily objects like their shoes, their I'm struggling right now, their shoes or their slippers, or so in our family we have a word that we use that my son created. That's a made-up word that we use, kakakis. My son couldn't say the word calcetin, sock, when he was little, so he created this word kakakis, And now kakakis just refers to anything that's on your feet. So it could be slippers, it could be sandals, it could be flip-flops. And so in our family, we just use that word. And it's almost a bit of a lazy word because it's one word that denotes like a category of things. But when I realize that there's people outside of our family who are listening to us and don't know what we're referring to, I do have to go back and find a more precise word, which am I referring to slippers? Am I referring to sandals? So sandals is probably more for outside the house, as opposed to slippers, which would be like inside the house. So with your vocabulary, this creates a level of precision. And if you have categories of words versus a specific tool or specific like, I don't know, you don't just need a pen, you need a certain type of pen. So I usually get stuck when I'm looking for the specific word, and my default is to go back to a category. So I would recommend looking for words that are about types of things, kinds of things, categories of things, and it also it feels a little bit like a vocabulary game or a guessing game or some kind of a trivia game where you're looking to describe the definition when you can't find the specific word. So if I forget the word for pen, I will try to look for strategies in terms of like, it's a thing and what's its function. Like, it's a thing I hold in my hand to write. So it's a writing tool. As a teacher, I've had to come up with these ways to explain vocabulary to students over the years when they don't know words that are unfamiliar to them. So I have to become like a human thesaurus and look for multiple ways to explain the same thing. So that is a vocabulary exercise where it's not necessarily looking for synonyms, but being able to describe vocabulary words if you suddenly drew a blank. So using phrases like it's a kind of thing, or it's a thing you use to write, it's a place where you go to put your money, like a bank. So that's one thing that I use. Sometimes that can be a little frustrating for the listener because like I'm testing their vocabulary, but it keeps the conversation flowing. I don't just stop and be silent, and that can create a little bit more kind of anxiety or stress while I'm looking for that perfect word. So if you think of this as like like archery, and you're aiming, your only option is the center of the target, that creates a lot of stress. But when you can realize that you can use a definition, you can use a category. I often use analogies or comparisons. So it's like so if you can make a comparison, so it's like a pencil, except it has ink. Okay, so not a pencil, but it has a pen. Okay. So sometimes the native speaker or the other person listening to me, they can maybe go through their vocabulary and find that word for me. So that's one technique that I would use. With the idea of kind of communicating with other people and not just doing this in your head or by yourself, I generally have like a 5-second rule or even less, because now that I have kids, they will jump in the conversation the second I start to breathe or pause. And that can also be a distraction for what was I saying, or I lost my train of thought. So I usually need to simplify what I'm trying to say. And by simplifying it, this can be a little bit of a focus on what's the action, like what's the verb, what is the object, when did this happen, where did this happen. Those are a few key elements of a message that I focus on as an English speaker, and also as putting this into helping my students who are preparing for the TOEFL, and helping them prioritize kind of which words they need to focus their energy on. So if they're struggling to find key content words like who did this, what is the action, what is the object, where did this happen, when did this happen, how, I would usually tell them slow down a little bit when you're looking for those words. Try not to rush your sentence, but try to have those kind of 4, maybe about 6 pieces of information. Who, the action, the object, when, where, how. Those are usually the key things that people need to know in your message. If you don't have the exact word you're looking for, try to find something similar on it. Let me take a look at some of these comments here. So Sarah's saying, okay, in English, it's no problem to think in that language, but with Polish, I don't have the vocabulary for that. Okay, so vocabulary can definitely limit being able to express your thoughts. There's no real substitute for not enough words. In the past, I've tried to focus on core vocabulary, like a top 100, a top 200, top 500 most frequent words in the target language, and try to rely on these default words, like it's a kind of thing, it's a place, it's a person who does something. Try to give that definition using simple words. One thing I like are dictionaries that are for students. So student dictionaries tend to restrict the words that they use in the definitions, and you can use some of those definitions when speaking. So each new word can lead to another word to add into your vocabulary, but with a restricted set of words of like the couple hundred most frequent words. This can allow you to speak in a simple way, not necessarily a simplistic way, but it can keep your message simple. Generally in communication, if you can take a complex idea and make it simple, people can still understand it, but not necessarily the opposite. So if you take a simple idea and make it really complex or complicated, some people might be confused. So aim for a simple version of what you're looking for in terms of vocabulary or the grammar structure. I would also, for example, for English speakers, I would tend to tell English speakers to avoid using idiomatic phrases, phrasal verbs when possible, or slang or jargon. I remember when my brother first visited Europe and he had a presentation to give, and he presented it to me first before he went to his event. I realized that he was using a lot of sports expressions, slang, things that people learning English as a foreign language might not catch. So I had to remind him to try to simplify what he was trying to say. And that was not obvious to him. That was not easy. So sometimes it's, as a native speaker, when you're trying to speak in a target language, sometimes you need to go back to your original thoughts in your native language, try to rephrase them, try to simplify them. Like, what is the essence of this idiom? What's the main idea behind this expression? And try to translate the essence and not just the words that are part of an idiomatic expression. It takes practice. It's not always easy at first, but I think the hardest part in communicating sometimes is translating those idiomatic expressions and hoping that somebody would understand them from the pieces. But try to focus on the essence of it, simplify it if possible. Okay. What's here? Okay. Tatiana, yeah, I used to think in my target language while speaking. I'm not sure if you're saying like you don't do that anymore, or if you're saying you are used to thinking like you are doing it now. Okay. And Annette saying, yeah, kind of thinking directly in your target language. Okay. And let's see. And hi, Abby. Yeah, thank you for helping promote this on your Instagram page. And so in learning French. Yeah. Okay. And hello, Vadim again. And Hugo. Yeah. And let's see, with Sarah, I guess it's also a question of thinking consciously in your target language, but still thinking subconsciously in your native language. Yeah, I guess there could be two layers there as you're trying to react and think based on what somebody is saying to you. I sometimes use native speakers kind of like a human dictionary where I will try to like throw out that definition or the word or get close enough to it and see if they can, like if I forget the word, if it's on the tip of my tongue, maybe they can use it in the conversation. It depends. I mean, if the person is not a teacher, I'm not going to really expect them to do that for me. And there might be other priorities in a conversation. Like if you're having a family meal or spending time with friends, it's not a language lesson. So the priority there is more on just keeping the conversation going, flowing as much as possible. Okay. Let's take a look here. And with Tatiana, yeah, can you give me an example on a sentence with a phrasal verb, for example, and how to simplify it? Okay. So for example, I look forward to seeing you next week. Now, with this phrase of like look forward to, in some languages, that's not so easy to translate, this idea of look forward to. Some equivalents of look forward to could be anticipate, feel eager, maybe just simply I want this meeting to happen soon. What's another way to rephrase this? But kind of, yeah, those can be a little hard. Sometimes phrasal verbs can have a Latin, Greek equivalent. So to ask for something, for example, if you're looking for ask for something and you forget, do I need to use for or to or by or in? Perhaps rephrasing it as a Latin. So instead of ask for, using request, then there's no preposition. So some of the hesitating when you're looking for words can also be based on collocations. And collocations can be problematic. So a collocation is 2 or 3 words that go together as a group. And if you don't get all of those words together, if one of them is slightly off, you might accidentally change the meaning or make your message confusing for the person listening to you. Or worst case, they'll understand something completely different. And with phrasal verbs, they are sort of a collocation. And it can be frustrating because I know learning the phrasal verbs feels arbitrary. Like, what's the difference between fall down, fall over? They're both basically fall, but there's some slight difference in meaning. If you can replace those with something Latin or something Greek, I mean, in the context of learning English, that might make your English more formal at that moment. But if your target is clarity or understanding, then it might not be so important of using that phrasal verb correctly. So collapse could be an equivalent of like fall down, fall over. The building collapsed instead of the building fell down. So when we're looking for those collocations, if we don't get them instantly, if we haven't internalized them so that we use them automatically as a reflex, if you have to think through it and go like this word, that word, that can slow you down. And then if you don't find that right word, that can lead to some anxiety, that can create some stress, some tension, and when you become conscious of your performance going down, this can become like a self-fulfilling downward spiral. So you don't want to have to overthink finding those collocations or parts of an expression. Is it kill 3 birds with 2 stones, or is it a stone? Is it a rock? So if you're struggling to figure out which words are part of an idiom, maybe skip over that. Mention something else like, oh, okay, you're multitasking. You're doing 2 things at the same time. So express the idea of an idiom or a collocation instead of looking for the parts of it until that expression becomes more automatic. So in other languages, for me, I would say the looking for prepositions, like in Russian, v or na, which basically translates like in or on or at. Those are equally frustrating in English. Or for Spanish speakers, translating n into English as like in or on or at, that can be frustrating as well. So if you can rephrase your message to avoid some prepositions, that could help you speak a little bit faster. So any of those little bumps or pauses where you're looking for a word, especially a preposition or an article or some kind of a conjunction to pull your phrase together, that can start to slow you down. And to be able to keep the communication flowing as much as we can, we want to avoid some of those potential dips when you're looking for those words. And it's usually some of those small words. So rephrasing, simplifying can help a little bit. Let me go back into a few more here. And I'm used to thinking the target language. I try to do it as much as possible. Yeah, okay. So what are some other things I wanted to mention here? So with considering that like speaking is a performance. So I have a musical background. I used to play in elementary school, middle school, high school, university with piano, saxophone, guitar, bass. In the university, I had to be in a choir. I would say the most stressful times, though, was when I had to perform by myself on the piano. So I had to do several piano performances, like parts of a recital where my piano teacher would have all of her students perform at the end of the year. We would each perform one song or piece of music. And that was a very stressful experience. And I realized that when you are practicing by yourself or practicing with a teacher, you can kind of stop, correct something, fix it, go back and forth. However, when you're performing something in front of an audience, you can't do that anymore. There was one student I remember when I was very little, just like my first or second year of piano. She was much more experienced than I was. She was a lot older, and she was in the middle of a very difficult piece of music, and her mind went blank, and she just couldn't salvage the music. She couldn't go back a few measures start again and keep going. So she also kind of broke down, started crying. She got up, left. And for her, that was probably a very bad experience. But for me, as a young musician learning about kind of performance and all this, it was a bit traumatic for me because I realized like, okay, that's not good. Just giving up and leaving. So I started to develop a performance attitude in terms of like, well, if you make a mistake, keep going. And this also, I learned this. I learned this as a university student as well, where I did unfortunately make a few mistakes on a performance, and it distracted me. But I kept going. I tried not to stop or give up or just get up and cry and walk away. So I realized that, okay, similar with language learning, people probably don't notice the mistakes unless you show them to people. So it's kind of like having a poker face. So you try not to show your emotions too much, like keep going, be confident, and people will generally not focus on those mistakes. So I've seen this with students as well. There's a student I mention quite often about who is making lots of mistakes when I first started working with him, and I would make a correction, he would write it down, and he didn't really internalize those corrections. So the next day he would make the same mistake again. And on one occasion, I was able to listen to him in a conference call in English related to his job and his area of specialization. And I realized that the native speakers who were listening to him, they did not care about his mistakes. They were more focused on the content of his message. And probably if you ask those people later on what they remember about the conversation, they're probably not going to remember any of those mistakes. They're going to be more focused on the content of what the person wanted to say. So the how you say it is not necessarily such a big issue if you have mistakes. Your confidence, your attitude about those mistakes, and how you feel about your communication. So if you kind of make it look like this is distracting you, or this is making you feel nervous or anxious or stressed out about how you speak, then your listeners can feel that. But if you can have an attitude of like, okay, I didn't find the right word right now, but because my focus is on communication and because my focus is on like overall the message, not exactly how perfect I deliver it, but the content of my message, if you can focus more on that and being confident about your message, then there is some tolerance on how accurate your message is. And remember how you speak in your native language. I say something strange. I might say something strange. Sorry, the connection paused there for a second. I might say something strange in my native language, but I'm able to keep going, probably because I have enough vocabulary words. I have confidence about the grammar or the speaking. So I don't let that faze me or discourage me if I have mistakes in vocabulary or those things. So try to be nice to yourself, be tolerant with yourself in a foreign language. Try not to expect that you're going to be as perfect as you would in your native language. Let me go back here a little bit. So with Abby saying something somewhat similar to difficulties with phrasal verbs in English, I often struggle with, the de in French. Yeah, using those prepositions can slow you down because sometimes they feel a bit arbitrary. And So you can maybe look up word lists, collocations lists on those things, but ultimately in a conversation, getting an or a de, like making a mistake, if it's like a 50-50, kind of you're flipping a coin, I would keep the focus on keep the sentences flowing, keep going. If you make a mistake, probably the native speaker is going to understand you anyway. Most of the time, native speakers would usually recognize that this was maybe you're learning the language, you're not perfect, so there would probably be some tolerance on there. If they're a teacher, they might be able to write that down and correct you. But otherwise, I would not like stop speaking just because I couldn't find the right preposition. Okay. Let me see here with Sarah. Yeah, I don't think I speak my native language perfectly. Okay. Realizing that has helped make my foreign language speaking a lot easier. Yeah. I think a lot of us have just these unrealistic demands or expectations that like in order to be able to speak a foreign language, we have to set the bar at like 100% accuracy. And it's very unfair, and that creates a lot of stress and a sense of like, well, I'm never improving because I just constantly see the mistakes. So it's really important to praise ourselves for the efforts we're making, for the good things or the good conversations we have, and also this idea of crowd out bad experiences. So I've seen this in the case of like language exchange and finding language exchange partners. If you have one bad experience out of only one experience, that's going to be on your mind. You're going to be thinking like, okay, all language exchange experiences are bad. But if you have one bad experience compared to 9 good ones, so as a group of 10 experiences, one bad one is just 10% compared to 90% of like 9 out of 10 good experiences. So with communication, not really worrying about the mistakes when speaking or hesitating for these words or overthinking, try to remember or try to focus on those good experiences you've had and not approach your next experience thinking about, I'm going to forget the words, I'm going to struggle with the grammar, but look for the good in the people you're talking to. Expect that they want to see you succeed, expect that they want to communicate with you, that they will be patient, they will be tolerant of mistakes, and try to surround yourself with speaking partners who are kind of encouraging you and making you feel good about practicing and not stressed or nervous or anxious. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of language classes around the world where the students are expected to read and write and listen, and they're not given a lot of speaking practice. But when they are given the speaking practice, it's very stressful, and the teachers can be very critical and very harsh, and that can create a lot more tension. And especially if you have a large classroom, like 20, 30 students, not everybody has enough practice time. So it's not realistic to expect people to become very proficient in speaking well or accurately or confidently. So that's one of the reasons why the speaking challenge can definitely fulfill that need of extra speaking practice. But if you unfortunately are in one of those situations where you have a teacher who is discouraging you or belittling you or making you feel bad about mistakes, I would say, hey, try to find a private teacher, somebody else you can work with, or find a language partner who is more supportive of you and who makes you feel good about practicing. So I think a lot of us have stress, anxiety, some nervous associations with speaking. And we have outward expectations from other people, or our beliefs about how other people will respond to how we speak. Or we have our own internal dialogue of, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, people won't understand me. So we need to be careful with that inner dialogue. And we have to be careful with past memories of previous situations. So speaking ends up touching on lots of things that can be emotional, memories, and expectations about how we're going to perform. So try to be flexible, try to be more focused on the content of what you're trying to say, not so much on how perfect it is. And with recording yourself, that's an interesting, if you go back and listen to your recordings, that can be an interesting way for you to observe, where are you generally pausing? Are you using filler words? So filler words in English can be things like you can hear me using when I'm thinking, like, so, well. If you use them strategically, they can make your speaking sound more natural. I used to do this with some foreign languages like German. I learned some of these phrases, these like also, ach, genau, and I would throw them into my speaking. And there was one time my father had a student from Germany or Austria, I forget which, and she was studying in California, and I went to see my dad, and I was talking with this student after class one day, and I was practicing a little bit my German. I had only been studying it for about a year or two, I forget, and I was using these little expressions, these little, ja, genau, or gut gesagt, or what's another one for like the I agree, I forget. Yeah. I would throw those into the conversation on purpose, just to make it sound a little more natural. And later, I think this student told my dad, or asked him like, oh, I didn't know that you had lived in Europe or lived in Germany or lived in Austria. And he said like, well, no, we haven't. We've only been in the States. And then the student responded, well, then how did your son or me get those kind of expressions? Because I was using them idiomatically or naturally, and that was something I was doing on purpose. I made a conscious effort to look those words up in the dictionary and start adding them into my phrases, and that would usually make a native speaker a little bit more at ease, or put them at ease, because if they saw that I was struggling and I was learning the language like at the very beginner level, they would usually feel like they had to simplify how they were speaking. And I just wanted to have a more natural conversation and not so much of a German lesson. So using filler words, every language has a couple of them. Don't abuse them, but if you can use them in a natural way, you can put those in where you're thinking about what you're going to say next. And then, I'm using them right now as I'm thinking of what I want to say next. But use them as a strategy. They can buy you time as you're thinking about what you want to say next. Sometimes they can be a distraction. In American English, California English, you can hear people using the word like, even lots of native speakers using that. Like. So if you keep using, and you know what I mean. Every language has a few of those, but if you use them too much, it can be a distraction. So do listen to a recording. see which ones you're using more frequently, and where are you pausing. So similar to like my music background, if I saw that I was hesitating or pausing from one transition to like an easy section to a difficult section, I would need to work on that transition over and over again to get it more streamlined. So you might want to listen to your recordings and see where are you typically pausing or hesitating, and try to listen to native speakers if possible. Are they pausing and are hesitating in the same place? So is your pause a distraction? With my children, I noticed that they will pause when they run out of breath. So they might be in an awkward place in their sentence and then breathe and then continue their sentence. And adults, at least native speakers, tend to pause in strategic places. So there might be a comma. At least in English, it might be part of a thought group where you can come to the end of the subject, pause. Come to the end of the action, pause. Come to the end of the object, the place, the time, the manner. So each one of those content words, you can pause slightly. And if you're doing it correctly, your listener has enough information that they need to wait for you to deliver the next part of your message and not look frustrated. If you're cutting your message in the wrong place, you're pausing where they're expecting content and you're breathing, that can create a little bit of that like hurry up, finish your message, get to your point. So listening to your recordings and listening to recordings of native speakers like on TV or interviews or movies can help you, like where are those pauses. So sometimes listen to transcripts of interviews, look at the subtitles and the script of a TV show or a movie, and listen for the pauses or in an audiobook as well. Take an audiobook, look at the text, or a news article that has an audio file with it, and circle or put a slash or something like that. Where are the pauses? Where is the native speaker breathing or hesitating before they deliver the next part? Try to incorporate those patterns in groups into your own speaking, and native speakers will probably appreciate that more. It feels very arbitrary and very difficult at first because you probably have a very different pattern in your native language compared to that in a target language. Sometimes it'll be a very different style of speaking. Some languages will be very quick or a steady speed of speech. Some will have more pauses and breaks. So be aware that there will be differences there, and try to listen to your recording, listen to other people's recordings. And if somebody can record your information, re-record it for you with those pauses where it's appropriate. It can take some practice, but it will improve overall. Where can you pause, and like how long can you pause, and looking at the reaction of somebody listening to you. Okay. Let me get back over here into some of the comments here. So I'm trying to stop obsessing over the minor details. The articles, le, la, or these prepositions, the a, de, from Abby here. Yeah, so focus more on the communication, not so much the tiny details. Okay, and I found it very helpful to go over minor mistakes that I make frequently. Okay, if they've fossilized, that becomes like you're not thinking about them anymore. They just come out, and if you can fix them, if you can get feedback from a native speaker or feedback from a partner who notices them, that can take some conscious effort to fix them until they become internalized and automatic again. Especially for intermediate advanced speakers. Okay, and Anetta saying, I use fillers when I hesitate what I want to say. Okay, and I like your idea of having a poker face. Crowd out the bad experience. So I've seen this with lots of students where if they look nervous or they look anxious, it usually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy or self-fulfilling expectation where They look nervous. I kind of feel nervous as a teacher. Should I interrupt them and correct them, or is that going to just make them more nervous and more anxious? Do I take my note? I want to usually build people's confidence up and make them feel comfortable speaking. So depending on that person's level or their confidence level, I usually will back off in terms of comment corrections, because I don't want to be a kind of nitpicking stickler or pedantic kind of teacher of like, you got the or the de wrong in French, or it was le and not la, or like, I don't want to be that kind of a teacher. I want people to feel comfortable and confident. So it's also important for the speakers to kind of just project an idea of confidence. There's a really good TED Talk by Amy Cuddy. So this is about the body language and confidence. That's a very good talk to think about body language, especially in the case of something stressful like talking to somebody else in a foreign language, or even like a job interview experience. So looking confident, acting confident, you might have to, as she says in that, fake it until you make it, meaning look confident even though you don't feel it, and usually people can respond to that or react to that. Also here with Abby. So using the fillers, the ba, those donc, bref, voilà, quoi, they can be useful. So mirror what you listen to. So it can be a lot of that input. Listen to the radio, listen to a lot of audio input. Notice how native speakers are using their own language. And as Sarah had mentioned here, of like, we don't speak our native language perfectly. So we shouldn't expect ourselves. We shouldn't expect to do that ourselves when we're learning a foreign language. Wow, I've never thought, Giovanni, I've never thought that pauses in the right places could be helpful to seem natural in speaking. Yeah, that's something I definitely see in the TOEFL, the test of English as a foreign language. So one of the aspects of the speaking section and the speaking recordings, one of the criteria is about the delivery. And there are metrics, there are algorithms, computer algorithms that are analyzing people's audio files, and they can detect where already there's sound to text dictation software. So if you go into like Google Documents and you use the voice typing, it can dictate what you're saying. So there are algorithms that are already writing down the words you're saying, and they can also they can detect where are these pauses. So there are good pauses and there are bad pauses. So the bad pauses, that's where it's a distraction. That's where it's in the middle of part of what you're saying. Where you pause, that can affect how native speakers kind of interpret your message correctly. I remember in middle school, high school, where we would have to read out loud in my English class. So there might be a play and we would have to read the dialogue, or we would take turns reading a short story out loud. So somebody would have a paragraph, another person would have a paragraph. And that was a skill. Even for native speakers, we weren't necessarily reading well out loud. We could hear people struggling with the pronunciation of certain vocabulary words, or they would be native speakers and they would sound very natural when speaking in conversation. But once they were reading a text out loud, if they were not analyzing their sentence, they would become very monotone, or they would be pausing in the wrong places. So this is a skill, even for native speakers, to become conscious of it. It's usually part of back in school, but as an adult, these are things that can be learned with practice, or with a coach or a language guide who can kind of point these things out. So, okay, we've come here to almost about 55 minutes. I didn't have slides today, but I did manage to go through a lot of these ideas that I've had about the thinking, overthinking, a little bit the translating. I didn't mention too much the translation part, but in the Facebook group, I did share a link with from Wired, which is about two interpreters, and they have a lot of experience, and their comments on what do they do when what they have to translate. So it's not their words, it's what they're listening to and interpreting, what they do, and the idea of simplifying their message, focusing on the main ideas and not getting distracted too much on small words. And also, before they go into a difficult situation, they may need to refresh their memory on related vocabulary, appropriate vocabulary, so they're not kind of looking for those words awkwardly. Because if somebody is listening to that interpretation, they don't want to be distracted by the interpreter's mistakes or lack of vocabulary. So that's a helpful video. And but with translation overall, I would say each language is a little bit different on syntax. Syntax meaning like the word order, especially if a language has case endings like Russian or German or Polish. There you case endings can create flexibility, but then again with German you do have some other things like where you do put the verb. So those are some other constraints to be aware of. So I will have to go back through this recording, take my own notes, listening to myself, and try to condense this into either a blog post or some details for an upcoming email, or perhaps even part of the book that I'm writing about the speaking challenge. But I hope you have found this helpful. If you have other questions here, I'll be happy to respond to these. But thank you for your comments here from Sarah, Aneta, Vadim, Tatiana, Abby, Hugo, and also Giovanni. Yeah, thank you for being here and participating in the chat. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your comments. So one last thing here. Yeah. And Abby, again, like you mentioned, rephrasing your ideas using vocabulary that you already know. Yeah. Aim for what you do know instead of feeling bad about what you don't know. Give yourself credit for what you do know. And looking back at recording, I find it difficult to find the right word, le mot juste, the perfect expression. You probably do want to get some feedback from a native speaker who can help you find that. As I mentioned last week, there's a vocabulary learning project I want to put together with native speakers and learners together to improve the communication process there. And I found that working with a native speaker can help find your own speaking rhythm, expressions that you rely on, vocabulary. Definitely getting the input from a native speaker or somebody who's more advanced can help that. I've seen this with lots of things with business related as well, where you can take the time, do it by yourself, just rely on your own research, but that can take a long time. But you can streamline the process and cut out a couple steps, and jump forward a little bit if you can get input from somebody who has the experience or has already gone through that process that you're experiencing right now. So sometimes working with a native speaker teacher, or that can be a financial consideration, but if you can reach out to native speakers who are language partners, sometimes that can be a little bit more affordable, where you're both helping each other depending on what those language exchanges are. Okay, and so I'll be wrapping this up, but thank all of you. I thank all of you for being here, and you're certainly welcome. Hopefully you've found out something insightful, something new, something you hadn't considered before. about communication and what to do with your vocabulary or with your experiences with learning another language and also how you communicate as a native speaker. So try to keep all of that in mind, and I look forward to another session for next week as well. And yeah, the vocabulary project, would love to know what you've conceptualized so far and how we could help in the creation of resources in our native languages. Definitely. I'll send you a message over on Instagram. It would be great to get your input as well and get more people interested in helping out and testing out some of the stuff. So a few people have responded. I asked last week to respond by email or by text message, or to let me know what their thoughts are, what if they would want to participate. So definitely, if people are interested in these kind of thoughts, reflections on vocabulary learning and how to use them in communication, please reach out to me, send me a message. So I'm getting a small group together of people to test out some of these ideas and kind of make a concept together as a group. Okay. So wish you all a great rest of your day, afternoon, evening. Talk to you soon. And just going through back over to this poll that we had looked at. Let me get that quickly. And coming up with what will probably be next week's topic. But so we've talked a little bit about vocabulary and this speaking part. So yeah, the next thing that was on that list of priorities was consistent practice, being regular or being consistent, doing this on a daily basis. So that is definitely something else I see learners, especially in the speaking challenge, kind of struggle with. And that is definitely something I want to focus on in the book I'm writing for the speaking challenge. So the first section is definitely about the mindset, what are some of the obstacles about learning another language or speaking in another language. And a second part is, once we get past some of those obstacles and mindset changes, is getting into habits and what works, what doesn't, what turns into a good habit, what can interrupt a habit, what can be some of those challenges. So recently we looked at some of these possible excuses. Like I published this on Instagram for 30 excuses. We also looked at this in the speaking challenge about common excuses for not speaking. So I think I would like to go back and take those 30 excuses that we looked at of like why people aren't making the recordings, and also integrate them with why it's so difficult to create a routine or reminders or those scheduling strategies. So that'll be the focus of next week. So I plan on doing this at the same time. Let me just double check if I don't already have some lessons scheduled at that time, but hopefully, no, yeah. So it doesn't look like I have a lesson scheduled at this time. I'll go ahead and block that off. So great. So I will see you next time. And thank you again for being here. Yeah, and Hugo, talking about a book, Habits, a few minutes ago. Yeah, on Instagram, the book that I had mentioned was about Charles Duhigg. This Power of Habit. That has been a very excellent book. He also has a TED Talk that you can watch. He's also been in a couple interviews on podcasts and talking about his book. It has been very influential for me. It allowed me to make a lot of progress within the speaking challenge for about 6 months. I was able, from about last August until January, not this year, the other year, I was able to go for about 6 months, making 5-6 recordings per day. And so I was able to get up to about 1,000 recordings over about 6 months. So after that, I kind of burnt out. But the idea was figuring out how to turn something into a habit and like a non-negotiable habit. So every day before I went to bed, I was making my recordings, and it did help out a lot for that. Okay, so thank you everybody for your time. I will wrap this up here. I could probably keep talking forever, but I do want to be mindful of your time, and thank you for watching here, for joining, for leaving your comments about this topic. And we'll be back next week to talk about kind of learning consistently, sticking to a schedule, developing a good habit. Okay, great. Well, talk to you then. Take care.